What is up, you guys? Welcome to another episode. In this episode, David reveals if his mega dose sorghum experiment increased DHT or not. According to my knowledge, this is the first human that ever megadosed sorghum and tested his DHT. We also talk about cholesterol. We talk about how to increase and decrease SHBG and some very fascinating theories of how to modulate it that most people do not know about. Then we talk a little bit more about cholesterol and some upcoming experiments. So enjoy. So David is going to share with us something sad news, but I would say he's one of the first individuals that was actually able to test this. So this is amazing. David, take it away.
Yeah, so I got my full bloods back from the DHT tests for sorghum. So I didn't only test DHT with sorghum, I tested everything. I tested my cholesterol levels because I was actually primarily interested into whether and how much sorghum would be able to reduce my cholesterol levels. But I also tested it for thyroid. There's concerns around sorghum for lowering iodine absorption and things like that, and so it can have a negative impact on thyroid function. So I tested that. I tested my testosterone, estrogen, prolactin, free testosterone, DHT. I tested the whole lot, liver markers, everything. And the results were very, very interesting, to say the least. So to cover off some of the basics for it, so things like thyroid health, my thyroid function actually improved slightly over the previous tests. My thyroxine and free T3 were higher on lower TSH, which means my body was more easily producing, thyroid hormone. There was less of a signal even needed for that, so it had no negative. And in fact, my some of the markers were actually up towards the top end of range for me, which is interesting when I look at some of the other results that I achieved as well. So in terms of some of the positives, my estrogen dropped. We'll talk about that a little bit more because it's a positive in some respects, but in this particular case, it was actually a negative for me because my estrogen actually dropped below a range that I'm happy with. My estrogen sits pretty low anyway, or it has done this year. And so it's interesting to see that it dropped out of range, and I'll explain why I think that happened. My prolactin was lower during the sorghum experiment than it was on the alpha tocotrienols, where it was very low. I'd stopped the alpha tocotrienols about 3 or 4 days into the sorghum experiment, so there would have been a little bit of an overlap of the two, but not a huge overlap of the two. And then my HbA1c improved. That dropped quite a bit actually, and kidney and liver were very solid, like really good markers. Bilirubin was just slightly elevated, nothing that I'm worried about, but it's an interesting concept within the entirety of how sorghum impacted my bloods overall, because there were some negatives, right? The downsides, I didn't see a much of an increase for DHT production. I saw a very slight, so it went up like 0. It was a very small percentage increase. Okay, my cholesterol didn't budge, so my LDL cholesterol, which was the main thing I was checking total cholesterol and all the other markers too, but basically I was trying to see if it would lower my LDL and all the various markers within that, and it didn't. It sat around the same range it normally sits. It's definitely lower than if I was taking nothing, right? So the thing for me is most of the time with my cholesterol, I'm experimenting with things to lower it. And my total cholesterol was like 325 with sorghum, which is still lower than it would be if I wasn't taking anything at all. But it's no lower than anything else that it didn't make a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
So
And just to remind the audience as well, like the reason why you were doing this was because the animal study showed that it lowered cholesterol or LDL by like 50-60%, right? It showed to be potent.
Exactly. So it certainly didn't lower mine by 40%, 30%. Perhaps, I'll do an experiment in the next couple of weeks where I take absolutely nothing and retest cholesterol to see how how high that would be. But from if I go back a couple of years to the earlier stages of where I had my cholesterol tested, it wouldn't be unusual for it to be over 400. So there might be a 10% or a 20% reduction, but not a 30, 40, 50% reduction, right? Which is what the animal study showed. And that's what I was interested in trying to achieve. My estrogen, dropped very low. And the reason for that, I believe, is because my SHBG went through the roof. Okay, so this is a really interesting consideration here. So let me just pull up the numbers on that. So my SHBG went up and my free testosterone went down by 45%. So that is a huge reduction on free testosterone. I said this to some of the people I spoke to about this already. I don't think this is a sorghum issue because my SHBG sits high anyway, right? So I'm going to be doing some experiments now over the next couple of weeks because this has given me some really interesting insight into perhaps why my SHBG sits high. And this is why it's so good to test and to dive into this stuff, because if you're not testing things, you don't know where things are going or why they're going in any particular direction. And so for me to do this test was really interesting. Obviously, SHBG can be affected by vitamin E supplementation, which I had been taking a relatively high dose, but something, 600 milligrams per day. So not a particularly high, not a crazy high dose. And you would not expect to see an increase in almost 40% in or more. One sec, what was the percentage increase in SHBG? Yeah, over 40% increase in SHBG. You would not expect to see that on vitamin E. You might see a 10% or a 5% increase or something like that. I think you've seen similar to that, haven't you, Hans? So, and then obviously the bilirubin was slightly elevated. The drop in free T was the biggest surprise for me, and the increase in SHBG. One of the things I want to say on this is if there is so much less free testosterone, it's very unsurprising that estrogen dropped, because you need free testosterone to create estrogen, right? You need it to be available to be aromatase to create estrogen. So the reason why my estrogen was so low, by far the lowest I've ever seen it, is because my free T was also very low. It was at the bottom the bottom end of range, and my testosterone was over 900. So, so my testosterone was fine, like it was absolutely fine, but my free T was at the bottom end of range, which means if there's low freely available testosterone, of course you're not going to get very much aromatizing to estrogen. But at the same time, you then expect a lot less to be converting to DHT because it's unavailable. And I didn't see that. So the really interesting thing on this, and this is where I'm going to have to come back to sorghum, and I'm very excited to come back to sorghum, is that if you have a massive drop in free testosterone, you probably expect to have similar drops in testosterone derivatives, things that are formed from testosterone, like estrogen, like DHT. But my DHT went up slightly. My estrogen went down significantly, but my DHT went up a tiny bit. So does that mean that sorghum is upregulating 5-alpha reductase? Or does it mean that my body just knows that it needs to prioritize DHT over estrogen?
Yeah.
Does it know that? So this is where it gets really interesting. So I'm very excited for the next stage of tests I'm going to do for this, because firstly, what I need to do is get a handle on my SHBG. If I get a handle on my SHBG, then I can have a more consistent testing point, less variations within it. You can't test things like estrogen and DHT effectively if your available testosterone is changing this much from test to test, right? So I need to get a little bit of a handle on that. And I think by doing this test, I think I'm finally starting to understand potentially some of the mechanisms for why the SHBG is often high. It's normally within range, but towards the higher end of range, and it's not unusual for it to be above range for me. And in this case, significantly above range. And some of the other markers within this sort of give some clues as to why that might be. But one of the interesting markers on this is actually the DHT to SHBG ratio. Because if you think about DHT and free testosterone, you need a certain amount of free testosterone in order to convert that free testosterone to DHT. And my DHT to SHBG ratio improved by 40%. So, imagine I had 20 pieces of free testosterone in a previous test, and then one of those became DHT. So that's obviously a 20-1. In this scenario, let's say I had 10 pieces of testosterone floating around, and one of those became DHT. My DHT to free testosterone ratio is so much higher, and I think that, to me, does suggest some positive changes to 5-alpha reductase. Whether it's actually due to increases in 5-AR or whether it's actually just survival, and actually trying to create some DHT out of what little free testosterone there was. And I'm not saying it was like crazy low, but it was towards bottom end of range. And so that is something that's really interesting. I actually thought that sorghum would lower my SHBG. So sorghum can help to upregulate PPAR-Y, which is can help to lower SHBG in some cases, and it didn't do that. And then there was other reasons. I was thinking, why would sorghum increase my SHBG this much? Sorghum does boost GLP-1 more than other carbohydrate sources. We talked about that last time. There's studies on that, 21% more than other grains, for example.
Yeah.
Would you see such a large increase in SHBG from a potentially moderate increase in GLP-1? Probably not. GLP-1 agonists do increase HNF4A, which does lower SHBG, which will increase SHBG, I should say. So GLP-1 agonists can increase SHBG potentially. And also there's HMG-OA, which is obviously one of the rate limiting factors for cholesterol synthesis, which is what statins act on, right? And there's some research on how statins affect SHBG and free testosterone. Some studies showing that statins will decrease SHBG, some showing that it will increase SHBG, but potentially those changes in SHBG are more a result of changes in testosterone production rather than directly from altering the HMG-OA levels. But one of the things this has led me on to is amylase. And so this is where it gets a little bit experimental, and then this leads on to my next set of experiments. Okay, so over the last few months, I've been trying to reduce cholesterol in a number of different ways. I've obviously tried with sorghum. I tried with berberine, TUDCA, which was actually the most effective out of everything I've tried up until now. And berberine and sorghum both had very little impact on my cholesterol levels, but they both increased my SHBG. Berberine is shown to increase SHBG in studies. And so they're probably working or potentially on similar mechanisms here. And they do mechanistically work on certain enzymes and genes and things like that in similar ways. But one of the things that they both do is reduce amylase quite drastically. And lots of the things I've been experimenting with, things like bitter melon, things like citrus bergamot, things like orange peel, lots of things I've been experimenting with this year for cholesterol lowering, lower amylase as well. And it led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole into things that I want to experiment with in order to lower my SHBG. And one of the first things I want to experiment with is amylase supplements. So I will basically not be taking anything to reduce amylase, and I'll only be taking things to enhance amylase. So in the long run, this is going to be done through diet. So I'll be on the beers. Beer is high in amylase. I already started yesterday. But also, so very ripe bananas, ripe mango, these sorts of things are naturally high in amylase. And one of the things I would say that was a lot lower during my sorghum experiment was things like some of the fruits and carbohydrates that I would normally consume. So I was trying to eat as much, I was trying to get as much of my carbohydrate from sorghum as I could. So I don't think I ate a banana for 5 days, and my fruit intake was a lot lower. Normally I'll have like at least 2 or 3 bananas a day in a shake, and then I'll have a few other items of fruit as well. And so there's a couple of things at play here. So normally that means I'm consuming more fructose and also consuming more amylase, and certainly not inhibiting amylase. We know that fructose can lower SHBG. There's a study on people that just drank Coca-Cola with high fructose corn syrup. They have significantly lower SHBG. Why is that? Is it, it's because I think potentially is because fructose is broken down through different mechanisms to starches and glucose. My SHBG typically is lower if I've had a period of time where I've been drinking a little bit more alcohol, not stacks of not a lot of alcohol. But this year, the lowest SHBG I had was after a couple of glasses of wine the night before. And again, alcohol works in different ways to, or is absorbed and utilized in very different ways to glucose and starches and things like that. So my thought process on this is that I've drastically reduced my amylase production. So I've ordered a couple of amylase test kits. So I'm going to be testing my amylase at the start and 7 days later, and to see how that impacts my SHBG. If my amylase levels are low at the start, then I think I've got a good theory to test upon here. If my amylase levels are very high at the start, then it'll probably be a flawed experiment, because I don't think then increased amylase is going to help. But sorghum, berberine, bitter melon, all of these things reduce amylase significantly. And if you're doubling up, tripling up on some of these things, as I would have often done in the past, like I would have been having some ginger also reduces amylase too. I'd be having ginger, bitter melon, sorghum, berberine, like all in one stack. And I imagine the compound effect of 5 potent herbs that lower amylase could lead to quite a big impact on it. And the reason why I think that the reduction in amylase could be part of this process is because you need amylase to successfully break down starches into smaller molecules and ultimately into monosaccharides. And monosaccharides lower HNF4A, which we know directly inhibits SHBG. So could it be that because sorghum was lowering my amylase so much, and we know that it lowered my amylase, or we know that it reduced my absorption of carbohydrate, because my blood sugar, my HSB1C dropped significantly, as did my blood sugar levels and spikes and all of these things. So we know that my carbohydrate absorption was potentially reduced. And as I was saying, monosaccharides, which you need amylase to create, lower HNF4A, which directly inhibits SHBG, and fructose doesn't require amylase. Alcohol doesn't require amylase, right? So there's some interesting things here for me to experiment with. And I did a little bit reading. There's nothing on men and amylase and testosterone. Nothing, no studies, nothing. But I did find 2 really interesting studies on women. So women with polycystic ovaries. So this is really interesting. One of the most prominent side effects of women with polycystic ovaries is that they have lower than normal SHBG, which is why they tend to get androgenic side effects, right? me and Hans were talking the other day. Women have 185% higher DHT to testosterone ratio than men, right? So they have low testosterone and higher and in higher DHT. DHT has the highest affinity binding to SHBG. So if you're a woman with very low SHBG, that DHT then isn't going to be bound. It's going to be free to work, right? It's going to get going. And this is where some of the common side effects of polycystic ovaries are things like, hair growth and things like this, which are very DHT based outcomes. DHT for beard growth. That's what does it, right? And so it's an interesting concept that for women with polycystic ovaries, they have much lower levels of SHBG. I haven't done a huge deep dive into this yet. I've started, so correct me if I'm wrong, but on everything I've looked at so far, SHBG is lower. And one of the studies I pulled up tested amylase, and they had significantly higher amylase, like 2 to 3 times higher levels of amylase than women who do not have polycystic ovaries. And I'm like, this sounds interesting, right? This sounds really interesting. And then the other study I found was actually in women and arousal. So they were measuring women's arousal based from exercise and also from watching like an erotic movie, like a porno movie or whatever. And with increases in the women's arousal, they measured amylase, alpha amylase, I think, in saliva, right. And they also measured testosterone as well. And women's arousal increased through both of those things. Testosterone didn't increase, it stayed the same, but amylase increased a lot, like relatively quite a lot in that period of time. And so again, it's if someone's arousal is increasing, but their testosterone is not, then perhaps it could be an increase in free testosterone. So it's got me quite excited to test this. Whether it works or not, who cares? It's a really nice idea, and it's a concept that I'm excited about. And so I'm thinking that if I supplement with amylase on a high carbohydrate day, my monosaccharides are going to increase drastically, and hopefully then, with an increase in monosaccharides, my HNF4A is going to lower, it's going to come down, it's going to tank, and my SHBG will come down with it, right? So this is the ideas anyway. So there's that. Once I then have a better handle on SHBG, then I will be able to retest sorghum, probably, and hopefully I'll retest sorghum with an amylase supplement alongside it, and see then what the effects are there, because I do think that there was positive changes in, well, my DHT to free testosterone increased, right? That's what we were looking. That's what I was looking for, right? That's all I was looking for. So if I can now free up more testosterone, will my DHT come up? So my DHT is not high. It's just below middle range of what's recommended by the company that I use, and so I know that my DHT has plenty of room to be increased. I thought, I've had things like high prolactin in the past. I was like, right, maybe, prolactin, and that's a big no-no for high DHT, right? Estrogen, big no-no for DHT. But what if it is more down to the lack of free testosterone because of the elevated SHBG? Of course, that's gonna play into it. So I'm excited to test amylase. So I've got 2 amylase test kits coming. I've got 2 full hormone profile test kits coming. I have another DHT test, which I've got in the bank. I think if I see some positive changes with my, with lowering SHBG, then I'm going to be really interested to test sorghum with amylase. But that's something I'll probably do a little bit further down the line, because I still want to do the creatine and DHT study. So that's my sorghum experiment. Way more interesting than what I thought it was going to be. way more it's way more useful for me than I thought it was going to be, right? If it had come back and it was like a mild increase in DHT and nothing else changed, I'd be like, who cares? But this has given me so much information to pursue to optimize my other markers as well. And yeah, I'm excited to try it. I mean, have you ever read anything about correlation, amylase, and and free T or anything like? It's not something that I've come across at all. But the two studies I did find in women, they don't they validate the concept. Not there's no proof in those, but they validate the concept.
Yeah. So like salivary amylase is more like a marker of stress, right? But being in a aroused state is a stress state because your sympathetic nervous system, adrenal state that is being activated. So I haven't even thought about like supplementing amylase, glucose absorption, but it makes so much sense. Like I'm thinking when you're using sorghum, it's high in fiber, and then there is some studies showing that higher fiber diets can increase SSBG. Right, so that's also a mechanism that can play a role. And then we know that insulin is really important for lowering SSBG. And so if you have lower levels of amylase, you have less glucose flooding the system, you have less insulin, and so technically your SSBG can go up. And so that's also one of the main things about women with PCOS is that they have insulin resistance, right? They're diabetic.
Yeah.
And it's like you will very often see it's the metabolic syndrome, people with fatty liver that's insulin resistant that end up with the hormonal dysregulation and low SSBG.
Yeah, exactly that. But it did get me thinking on this as well, right? So obviously there's this crossover between insulin and SHBG, but could that be more to do with the monosaccharides than the insulin itself? Is the insulin just a result of the system being flooded by those, right? So one of the things I've obviously experimented with in the past for my SHBG is very high carbohydrate diets, and not just sorghum. So where I'm, consuming vast amounts of carbohydrate, and that didn't particularly budge my SHBG either, even though my insulin would have been very high. And I actually tested insulin levels, and my insulin was fairly high during this time as well. So for the mechanism for me, insulin, like I had 400 grams of carbs for dinner the night before this test, right? Like, and it wasn't all I had some rice as well, and there was sorghum. So insulin would have been high. And high insulin, obviously, if it doesn't, insulin can't grab big starches and move them around, right? Like insulin can't do that. So it needs these things broken down into much smaller metabolites to be able to be utilized. So in this case, I think I had high insulin, but that insulin wasn't doing very much, right? It wasn't being productive. And I think that that's potentially a case where where some people on a higher insulin, or when their levels of insulin are higher, don't see changes in SHBG, like myself. So that's an interesting concept, and I think potentially the insulin and SHBG is a correlation because of the monounsaccharides or the amylase or whatever it might be. Which is why I'm actually really excited to experiment with this, because obviously we know, for example, people on ketogenic diets have elevated SHBG, right? They have lower free testosterone. And is it because their insulin levels are lower, or is it because their amylase and monounsaccharides are lower because they're obviously not consuming the carbohydrates that are broken down into those things? So could someone on a ketogenic diet supplement with amylase and see reductions in SHBG? Like, who knows, right? What is the signal here? Is it insulin? For me, it doesn't seem to be, right? And I know there is some discussions that the insulin and SHBG is more of correlation than causation. I was reading up into this quite a lot this last year, and it did seem to be a little bit more correlation to causation potentially. And then, so is the mechanism insulin itself? Is it the smallest carbohydrate molecules broken down? Is it that? Is it the amylase itself? Obviously an increase in amylase, you're going to digest carbohydrates more quickly. So you're going to have a flooded system of monosaccharides, and also you're going to have a much bigger insulin response than you would do after having something where your carbohydrates aren't being broken down effectively. So which one of those things is it, or is it a combination of all those things?
Yeah,
So it's an
them.
interesting thing to look at, yeah?
Yeah, that's why you're testing them individually. I think it would be also interesting if you can test glucose powder like maltodextrin, because it's like immediately into your system, highly insulinogenic, versus fructose is also instantly into your system, but it's not insulinogenic. And then in between you have sucrose, because you have the synergy between the glucose and fructose. So you can mega dose each one of those for about like a week, and then see if there's any trends and correlations between the two. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, so I've already bought agave nectar or agave honey, or agave, because it's like nearly completely fructose. So that
Like
so that's a really
70%
easy.
or something.
Yeah, so that's a good way of testing it. I could buy fructose powder. That might be more accurate, more sensible. It'd be interesting to know how. I should probably test alcohol too, right? I mean, to test beer, yeah. Because I was saying we went for. I'm in Edinburgh at the moment. We're visiting my partner's sister, and we went out last night. And I was like, right, if I need amylase, then I'm gonna have a couple of beers. Beers are nice and high in amylase, right? And is it coincidence when you have a couple of beers, you start to feel a little bit, you get a bit more
For
excited?
science, man. For science.
Is that the alcohol, or is the amylase, right? So
yeah, it's now your drinking is a tax deductible.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, always, absolutely. But yeah, here's the things I want to test, right? I want to test amylase supplementation on a normal diet. I want to test amylase supplementation on a ketogenic diet as well. That'd be interesting, right? First and foremost, does amylase help, right? That's going to be my first. Or if my amylase is low, does amylase help? I was talking to you last week. I want to test fructose. I've already got that. That's a really obvious test for me, because it's obviously a completely different way in which you break down the carbohydrates. So that's going to be really interesting. And it's more of it's done in the liver in that sense, isn't it? And obviously SHBG is a liver thing. So that's going to be really interesting. So yeah, fructose, glucose by itself, sensible. Amylase on a ketogenic diet as well, or at least like do ultra low carb for 4 or 5. Whether I'm keto or not, I'll just go low carb for 4 or 5 days.
I'm glad you're doing this, because there's really not a lot of information of like how to really solve the root cause. There's a lot of like studies that just look at correlations and those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So luckily, your problem is high SSBG. My problem is low SSBG. So now we're can help to figure this out, because now.
Yeah. So, I think that this would be really interesting. Would be to, for whatever that I find is successful for me, you would sort of have to do the opposite in order to, to actually increase your SHBG. One of my clients, one of my online coaching clients, he had his blood work done the other day. Everything looked pretty good. Prolactin was a little high. T was fine. SHBG was like really low. Yeah. His blood sugar markers are okay. They're not bad. Like his HbA1c is fine. Fasting glucose is fine. So what's the mechanism for his low SHBG? Is it an overproduction of amylase, right? Could it be that? Or is it that his diet is high in fructose? So, we're going to look into some of these things and see what am I doing that's opposite to what you are doing, whether that be in terms of our nutrition or physiologically. What is my body doing so differently to yours? Even though our diets are going to be pretty similar, there's going to be so many similarities in what we do, but yet the outcome is polar opposite. So it's a really interesting thing for us to look at.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways you can go about this, but I have done really low carb. I've done moderate carbs. I've done very slow digestible carbs like beans. I've
Hmm.
done like 700 carbs a day with like 20 bananas a day and honey and
Yeah,
all of those kind of stuff. So I fluctuate all over the place.
yeah,
Different kind of carbohydrate sources, and I've never really seen that it massively changed my SSBG. I've seen some fluctuations in my triglycerides, but that's about
yeah,
that.
yeah. And it's as you say, SHBG is one of the least understood markers of a very common blood test. In
Yeah.
my opinion, there's lots of data on reducing estrogen. There's loads of studies, successful studies on reducing estrogen. There's loads of successful studies on lowering prolactin. My prolactin's, I halved it in 10 days,
Yeah.
which we can talk a little bit more about today as well, because it was simple. It was one supplement. In fact, I think it was two supplements that really contributed to it in the biggest way. One is um, a more long term solution, which was the Endoros gel, right?
Yeah.
Um, because that lowers so many of the inflammation markers in the digestion, which contribute to high prolactin. So that in itself, anything that's going to lower, TNF alpha, all these inflammation markers in the gut is going to lower your prolactin, and so that is something I think I should test on its own for prolactin. But I also did it with the alpha tocotrienols, which lowered my prolactin significantly. So I said to you before that I used tocopherols, I've used gamma and delta tocotrienols. Those things didn't budge my prolactin, but the alpha tocotrienols budged my prolactin. Is that because my individual markers required alpha tocotrienol more than the others? Because it was, you know, like like I say, the TNF alpha, or so, whichever one of these inflammation markers was causing the elevation in prolactin that I've had over the last few months. Is it because is that unique to me, or is that something that would work for everybody? I know that some people have success with just taking tocopherols in general, right? Or
Yeah.
tocotrienols. It doesn't matter what any vitamin E, all vitamin E is anti-inflammatory, right? So, but the alpha tocotrienols is anti-inflammatory, works on those particular inflammation markers, and it also supports dopamine immensely as well. So I think that for me, that's the most profound changes I've had on my prolactin in recent times was with the alpha tocotrienols.
Have you ever tried a high gamma tocopherol?
Yeah. No, not tocopherol, tocotrienol. I have, but I haven't tried a high. I've used the Tocovit from Idea Labs. I don't know that's a mix of tocopherols, I think, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but it's dominant in the alpha tocopherol.
Sure. Okay, so no, I haven't. So that would be an interesting test for me as well.
Yeah, yeah. So like a gamma is low, alpha is high, and then something from extracted from soybean is low in alpha but very high in the gamma. So there's a
Mm.
company, damn it, what's it called? Gamma E. That's the
Okay.
one I
Oh
want to
yeah,
try again.
yeah,
Because it contains high tocopherol and the gamma and some tocotrienol, so I want to try that one
hmm,
again. I've already tried
yeah,
the Tocovit, and I want to try the tocotrienols as well with a high alpha, like you mentioned. So after I'm done with all of my estrogen experiments, I'm going to be switching over to like probably a prolactin series of experiments and be testing that
yeah,
as well.
yeah. So with my latest bloods, obviously the estrogen was very low, but for the wrong reasons. you know, who knew that estrogen could be that low for the wrong reasons? But in that particular case, it was. Um, but I think that obviously anything that's going to be helping to reduce the prolactin, it may be working off the estrogen side of things as well, right? So I think that the alpha tocotrienols for me probably were contributing to a reduction in estrogen there as well, prior
Yeah,
to prior to this sorghum experiment.
yeah. Let's switch back to the DHT from sorghum.
Yeah.
Because like labs is only telling half the story versus symptoms they're telling the other half of the story. So did you notice, given that your free T dropped, but your
Mm.
DHT to SSBG ratio improved, did you notice like a decrease in androgenicity, an increase, or just like a neutral effect?
I felt pretty good. I didn't feel notice like I didn't feel bad. my energy was good. My concentration focus was excellent. I'd potentially say a slight reduction in libido, but marginal. But I was doing some reading up on this side of things, because obviously DHT, I want to, I'm on a mission to increase mine now, because I'm like, hey, it could be better. Most men are on a mission, unfortunately, on a mission to decrease their DHT.
Yeah.
And which I just think is a terrible idea. So let's do a little on DHT quickly while we're here, right? Because basically, people might be thinking, why on earth are you trying to use sorghum to increase your DHT? Why would you want to do that? Isn't your hair all going to fall out? Aren't you going to get prostate cancer? Like, surely you want to have zero DHT, because isn't testosterone the only thing that matters? And you can have zero testosterone and high DHT, and moderate DHT, and your sexual function isn't compromised.
Yeah.
So you do not need testosterone for sexual function. It doesn't contribute towards it, because there's literally studies on men where they put them on DHT for long enough that their testosterone was suppressed to nothing, and their sexual function didn't change. One thing did change, was their libido dropped slightly. But there's complexities to libido that are much more complicated than one androgen, right? If you've got no testosterone, then you have no estrogen either, right? And we know, or at least from my understanding, that you need a certain amount of estrogen to contribute towards sexual desire, sexual function, etc., right? So if you have very, very low free testosterone, as I've just shown, or free testosterone in this case, your estrogen levels drop off a cliff. And on this particular study, they said the only downside of the supplementing with DHT long term was some changes in bone density, and they associated that with DHT, whereas I would associate that with low estrogen, like very low estrogen potentially. There's plenty of things you can read online, plenty of studies on estrogens, on estrogen having a supportive mechanism in bone density. And so, of course, if your testosterone drops that much, your estrogen is going to drop, and there might be some issues there with bone density. But the whole point of this is that the DHT is your sexual function. That's what it's there for. It's also crucial for muscle growth. So again, there's studies that out there at the moment. We'll probably link some of these because people might want to read them, on testosterone levels and muscle growth. And there was no correlation between testosterone levels and muscle growth, but there is correlation between DHT and muscle growth. And there is studies showing that DHT helps for you to recruit fast twitch muscle fibers, helps with motor unit recruitment. These are things you need for muscle growth. So my free testosterone was almost bottomed out on the sorghum experiment. My lifts in the gym didn't get any worse. I didn't get any weaker. Still got sick, an 8-pack and muscle. Like I'm in good shape at the moment. I'm lean, I'm strong at the moment, and that none of those. I know it's only a week, but you'd expect us to see some kind of drop off in performance, and there was none. There was no drop in energy. There was no drop in mood. There was no drop in sexual function. There was no drop in strength, even though my free testosterone went down 45%.
Yeah.
But my DHT went up a tiny bit.
Yeah, two important things here. One thing people should understand, it's never just DHT. It's 5-alpha reductase, and 5-alpha reductase is not just creating DHT. It's creating a bunch of GABAergic, called positive androgen over it. It's a modulator, positive modulator of the GABA receptor, right? It makes it more sensitive. The GABA can act better. You feel more calm, less depressed. You're just feeling so much better. This is why they're actually using allopregnanolone
Yeah.
as a depressive treatment right now. They inject allopregnanolone. So that is a 5-alpha metabolite.
You need five. Yeah, you need 5-alpha reductase for allopregnanolone, which is why people that take the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors have mood disorders.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you say, they're not just inhibiting DHT.
Yeah, not everyone is going to get side effects from finasteride, but you see a large percentage of people is at least experiencing some drop in libido, drop in erectile dysfunction, semen quality is going backwards, mental disorders and those kind of stuff. So that's the one thing I wanted to point out. The other one, and people might be saying like, oh, testosterone is anabolic. Yes, testosterone is anabolic. And there was actually studies where they gave people finasteride and they didn't necessarily see a decrease in muscle growth or strength gains, but they did see a drop in explosiveness. So you need that DHT for maximal muscle recruitment of the fast twitch muscle fibers. So if you're doing a sport where you need to be fast, like you're a boxer, you're doing sprints or those kind of stuff, you want to be explosive, DHT plays a big role there.
But also if you've been training long term as well, right? So for most people, lots of the early adaptive response to training that they get is from a development in the slow twitch muscle fibers, right? Which they develop relatively quickly, but their growth is capped, like it's minimal. Whereas the more fast twitch fibers, their growth is much, they have a much higher ability for growth. And so if you get like noobs who have never trained before and put them both onto something, a training program, and one has high DHT, one doesn't, within the first 6 to 8 weeks, of course, they're not going to see any major differences, because also a lot of the muscle growth during that period of time as well isn't really muscle growth. It's, additional glycogen. I doubt they did muscle biopsies for this, right? It's glycogen. It's also just edema. It's just swelling from the stress of exercise. The majority of most people's gains is really just swelling, because the fiber growth and the fiber development takes such a long time that I'd be much more interested if they did that same study over 10 years on, it'd have to be on nat people that are training naturally, obviously, because as soon as a synthetic testosterone anabolic comes into play, then, muscle growth will be elevated as a separate mechanism to training. But it would be really interesting to see those people's development over a longer period of time, where accessing those fast twitch fibers is so much more important than it is over that early point of training. If you're bench pressing 20 kilos, you don't need to tap in. You don't need to tap into those high power units. If you're trying to bench press 250 pounds, you do need to tap into those high. But that progress is going to take such a long time that the people's growth initially are going to be comparable. But then obviously that's where then the high DHT group will start to exceed, is where the other group would plateau.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction you're making right there. And before, people are like, okay, what the hell does David know? He's doing ring muscle ups with 20 kilograms around his waist, which is some really impressive stuff. So that was one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I think that's very impressive, right? I can do like regular bar muscle ups, but there's like a difference between bar muscle ups and like ring muscle ups. So any tips? You already have some stuff on your
100%.
Social media, but walk me through it.
What I'll do is, we can tag under the video a link to my Instagram, because I've done a short video on mastering ring muscle ups. So I got into muscle ups when I was about 17, right? So basically, I had a mate of mine. We were working together at a gym, and he was really into his gymnastic movements. And this guy was jacked, like he was in amazing shape, and he wouldn't touch weights. He'd do no weight training at all initially. And he was teaching me, front levers, back levers. And so I was so lucky to be introduced to this stuff like 20 years ago. And it wasn't particularly popular. I don't know where he found out about it, but it wasn't particularly popular outside of gymnastics. And so I've been able to do muscle ups for 20 years. And in that time, you experiment with different ways of doing them and different setups. My absolute favorite way of doing muscle ups is slow and controlled with weights added. So obviously you'll see in CrossFit and things like that where people will, they kip their body. So they'll, swing, they'll use momentum to swing up like essentially what you do on a bar muscle up, where you use your momentum from the legs, like tracking backwards to be able to swing and get your body over. I like to do my muscle ups, from full extension, with the body being pencil straight and no movement. You just locked in, boom, 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 and you push through like that. And I just think I honestly think the muscle up, this kind of goes against the, the bodybuilding side of things, and also the kind of optimum training sort of thing. I think the muscle up is the best upper bodybuilding exercise on the rings. I think ring muscle ups is the best upper body building exercise anyone could ever do, right? I think it just ticks so many boxes, and your chest gets jacked, your shoulders get jacked, your lats get jacked, your arms get jacked. Like, it's crazy. The hardest thing about it is the grip. So in order to do a muscle up successfully, you need to be in that false grip position. So you need the ring sat under here in that crease. So that so essentially you should be doing your pull-ups without the hand gripping. You need to be doing it resting on the palm. You're going to have the hand over naturally anyway, because it's going to be sat on the ring. But you should almost be able to do your pull-ups without the hand gripping here on in this false grip, it's called. Because then from there, that's where you need to then get the hand over. If you're gripping from here, you can't. There's no possible way of getting the wrist into position. So the very, very, very first thing anybody needs to do before even attempting the ring muscle up is just to get good at false grip pull-ups. If you can do 5 or 6 good quality false grip pull-ups, then you're ready to start muscle ups. The other thing you should then practice is your dips on the rings, just to build up that strength, because you need strength in the very deepest, darkest position in that dip, right? Most people that, when they're doing their dips, they're hitting like 45-degree elbow bend. You need your thumb to touch your shoulder on your dips, right? Because that's where you're pressing from on a muscle up. So you need to do dips where you're going as low as you physically can, and not just to 40, not to that position, but to a point where your hands are almost touching your shoulders. So that you need to be dipping that low. And then once you've got those two things locked in, you have all the strength in the world, you're fine, you can do it. Then it's just a technical thing. In the video that we can link, first step is you can do assisted ones. Really simple way of doing it is you just hang the rings nice and low, and you have your feet on the floor, and then you can use your feet to just lift, to give you some assistance. You can do it with bands as well, but by doing it with the feet, you can just control the resistance so nicely, and it just works so well for doing that. So I think that's a really nice progression there. And then the next thing is obviously to move up from that, and to doing it with an L-sit works really well, because by starting an L-sit position, you then can use the legs. So if you imagine the legs are out in this position here, as you get coming up to the top, you can then use the legs to kick the chest over. The most important thing from getting from the pull-up position through to the dip position is being able to get the chest over quickly. If you don't get it over quickly, again, you're not going to be able to get the hand over to press on the rings. So that's the most important step to there. That step is less important if you're doing it like more slow and controlled, because then that's just raw strength. There's no technique for that at all. And then once you can do them with an L-sit with the legs kicking back, then you could try it either like with a straight body or with an L-sit where the legs stay in front, which is a really nice way of doing it too. And then from there, you can work up to doing them with additional weight. I haven't done them for a little bit, and when you mentioned it, I was like, damn, I need to get back on my weekly muscle ups, because no exaggeration, my upper body is in the best shape. It has the best aesthetics possible when I'm doing muscle ups regularly. My upper chest development goes through the roof. My shoulders like pop out like crazy. Like, it's really, really good. The only consideration I'd say is that it's very hard on the hands and it's hard on the elbows. So it's nice to maybe wear some elbow sleeves just to keep them nice and warm while you're doing it. and you will take the skin off here. Okay, so chalk, you need chalk, and you need to put chalk on the wrists. And then once you've got all that dialed, then 20 kilo, 30 kilo, 40 kilo weighted dips, weighted muscle ups, here you come. But it's a great exercise, yeah.
Do you ever train like the transition? Because I feel like I can get it like easy up, right, with the rings.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of like that movement, right? The transition,
Yeah.
like unless you use a lot of like explosive power,
Yeah.
I'm struggling with that raw strength movement.
Exactly. So this is the transitional point is where you'd start with your feet on the floor, so that you can just practice that transitional movement from chest behind to chest over, because it's just chest. It starts in that behind position as you pull, and you have to get it quickly over. I actually find ring muscle ups much easier than bar muscle ups.
Really?
Because I just do them a lot more. I've done them a lot more over the years. But yeah, it's something that it's a great addition to people's program, and it's an impressive movement. It's a cool movement that most people can't do, right? Anyone can go and bench, anyone can go do this. Not many people can go do weighted muscle up. So it's a nice party trick for sure.
I was trying to do some ring muscle ups yesterday. I was getting so frustrated because like I was trying to pull up. I was just getting to here. I couldn't like get over.
Yeah.
And I switched over to the bar. Just like much easier for me. But like I felt like my shoulder, like in the inside, was like burning like crazy just from like trying the ring muscle ups. Like compared to the regular bar, it works the shoulder in a different way.
Yeah, it's more. I think it's more strength and less technical ability for a muscle up, especially if you're not doing it with any kind of kipping or momentum. It's more of a raw strength for sure. But yeah, I think it's one of those exercises that once you get the technique dialed, you then progress with it really quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll add that video. And maybe next week when we check back in, you'll be like, I'm doing weighted muscle ups now. It's fine. It's no big deal. It's nothing major.
That's not going to happen that fast for me. All right. So in terms of let's wrap this up. You talked a lot about like the Sorghum experiment, so I really want to try that as well. I think this thing about the amylase was like quite fascinating thing to try out next.
I would love for you to try sorghum and then see if your SHBG goes up, or anything that reduces amylase, and see if your SHBG, even for just 2 or 3 days, and just see if there's an increase in SHBG, because also that would help to validate my theory on that as well.
Yeah, because like the best I've seen my SHBG increase was like 9, right? Which is like not that much. It goes from like 10 to a 19, and the best increase that I got was from androsterone injections, and the other one was aspirin. I don't really understand the mechanism.
Androsterone's a really interesting one there. Do you think it is because it's one of those downstream 5-alpha reductase produced? Is it a 5-AR produced one? Yeah. So is it because it's anything that's kind of in that range of 5-alpha reductase produced compounds is increasing SHBG. And this is what you said to me that I should do a Dutch test. You're absolutely right, because maybe one of those things for me is elevated, right? Maybe it's not DHT. Maybe it's allopregnanolone. Maybe it's one of the other 5-alpha reductase produced derivatives of testosterone that is causing the increase in SHBG, not DHT. I mean, most people, they'll say, the easiest way of, estrogen, it's got the highest affinity to, like, a lot of people will contribute changes in SHB to estrogen, right? And if your estrogen is high, they're like, that's why your SHB is, but for me, no, my estrogen was almost nothing. Like, it was so low, it was ridiculous. That did not lower my SHBG one bit. So I think the next step for me, I'm going to do these experiments, but I'll also book in a Dutch test. So for anyone that doesn't know, a Dutch test basically looks at everything that isn't testosterone, estrogen, prolactin, and it looks at all the other things, and there's stacks of them. There's so many other derivatives, compounds, and things like that play on different mechanisms, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think one of the main unique mechanisms of androsterone is that it's an agonist of the FXR receptor, which regulates bile. So there might be some form of a bile connection, or I should test the FXR different agonists to it and see if I can get the same effect. That's the only unique thing that I can think of for
you
androgen.
think so? FXR having an impact on SHB production through bile somehow, yeah?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, like the cholesterol bile mechanism.
That's a really interesting concept, because when I was looking into compounds for lowering my cholesterol, I did a list of things I wanted to test, and androstenedione was one of them, because there was some information there that it can lower cholesterol quite significantly.
Yeah, because like back in I think it was like 60s, 1960s or so, they were injecting androsterone to lower cholesterol. I could never find how effective it was. I couldn't access the full studies. And so this is why I was also injecting 200 milligrams of androsterone per week, which, as people will know, is quite a huge dose. Like we're typically creating about 17 milligrams of androsterone per day. So 200 milligrams, and it was the enanthate, right? So with extended half-life. The half-life for androsterone is quite short, like under 20 minutes or so. So with the enanthate, I was having stable and elevated levels of androsterone like for 2 weeks straight. So mentally, I was
rather than
great.
for like 15 minutes at a time. Yeah.
Like I was feeling so calm on androsterone. It was like really amazing stuff.
Really?
I was feeling that GABAergic effect. But
did you do blood work? Did you do like lipids and things like that at that point?
Yeah, I think my cholesterol dropped by like between 10 or 30. I'm not exactly sure. So I was actually quite disappointed, but my cholesterol is not as high as yours. So you might have like a different effect.
This is the thing. I think with cholesterol, it's if it doesn't need, like, if it's not causing problems, then why lower it? Why would your body doesn't need to lower it. And the cholesterol thing is really interesting. And I've got some nice ideas on that as well, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I know that there was a couple of bits that you wanted to share as well today, right?
I think we're going to leave that for the next episode.
Okay, fine. So shall I cover the cholesterol bit just briefly as to what I'm testing next and why? Because I think this is quite a good ongoing one.
Yeah, but before you go on, I wanted to mention back to the sorghum. You have already posted a bunch of recipes on the Andronaut Academy. So I will put the link down below if you guys want to join. And then also in terms of, I just finished my vitamin K2 megadose experiment to see primarily how it affects estrogen. It was effective at modulating estrogen, but it's probably not directly via inhibiting aromatase, because last time I mentioned like it converts estradiol into estrone, almost like a similar mechanism to how DIM makes someone less estrogenic. It doesn't lower estrogen, it plays around with the metabolites. So that's just a sneak peek. Full article will be on my Substack, link below. All right, so hit us up with your cholesterol piece.
Yeah, so sorghum didn't lower it particularly, a little bit. Berberine, like more or less identical numbers after a week of berberine for cholesterol. And I was like, berberine, this is it. This is the one. It's going to be easy. Like cholesterol's going to be like absolutely crushed. Nothing, just nothing. No movement. And so it just got me thinking, right? I think I've just been looking at this in completely the wrong way for cholesterol for myself. Okay. So I was told when I was younger that I have a condition where my body overproduces cholesterol. So I've always looked at this from an angle of overproduction. Okay. And when people say there's an overproduction, it's like there's something wrong with you, right? It's like this is something that's wrong with you. But what if this overproduction is to plug a gap of something else that's wrong? Okay, so this got me. So with both of these experiments, sorghum, berberine, they both hit the LDLR receptor. They both hit the enzymes and the modulators of cholesterol production. They do, is evident. Like there's so much research on this, like that they drastically reduce cholesterol in people with elevated cholesterol, both of them. Berberine is comparable to statins in how not in its mechanisms, because it does things in a much nicer way, but in terms of the way it does it with the HMGOA, all that side of things. So I'm thinking, right, I'm hammering these things to try and lower cholesterol, but yet my body is continuing to fight against it to produce more. Like these compounds are lowering it. So my body must be then upregulating them even further to try and support an increase in production of cholesterol. And then I was like, okay, how many people are, that go on statins are resistant to statins? And it's a surprising number. I can't remember the exact percentages. I'll pull it, I'll find it, and I'll do it, because I don't want to throw a number out there. But it's a surprising amount of people that are statin resistant. Okay, so this is a drug that crushes cholesterol, but some people will fight against it to continue to produce elevated levels. So, like, why is that? Because mechanistically, you've done what you needed to do to lower them, to obliterate them. You've done it. So then I'm like, okay, so why would I have elevated cholesterol? What's the reasoning for this? And we talked about this last time, and I said this was going to be the next experiment I wanted to run, which was the phospholipids, right?
Mm.
So this is like mechanisms, and this isn't proven for me, but I've been testing my cholesterol with this and seen some good results from home, and I'll do a proper test kit on Monday or Tuesday. And there's two things I want to test, and they work on very different mechanisms, but these do not work on lowering any of those genes related to cholesterol receptors, cholesterol production. They work much further down the line. Like, those things are influenced by so many bodily functions way prior to them being relevant. So I was looking at, like, why, I was just looking at top level production of cholesterol, but like, what is signaling this production of cholesterol? Like, what is this signaling for? And obviously then we talked about the phospholipids, and I'm like, okay, so what do phospholipids do? And so phosphatidylserine is responsible for the last step of LDL cholesterol transport from the plasma membrane to the endoplasmic reticulum, right? So with low levels of phosphatidylserine, your cholesterol will not get into its end marker efficiently. It won't. Okay, so if you have very low levels of phosphatidylserine, then that pathway of cholesterol transport is inhibited. So what do you need to create phosphatidylserine? Well, you need, foundationally, you need choline, phosphatidylcholine. You need this process to be working efficiently. And we talked about this last time, that soy lecithins reduce cholesterol in humans by something like, it was like 40%. It was crazy high. I gave the numbers last time. Okay, so why is that? Is that because they're actually enhancing the transport of cholesterol into the cells, into the endoplasmic reticulum? Because in the ER, there are signals, and there's sensors for cholesterol. And so if there's a lower level of cholesterol in there, your body is going to signal for more cholesterol production. And so there's a gene or a gene expression which is a PSS1, which is phosphatidylserine related. And if that gene is low, then you have low production of phosphatidylserine, and this works in a supply and demand manner. So as levels of phosphatidylserine go up, then the PSS1 is lowered, and it works in a feedback loop in that way. So potentially, the ideas behind this is that with a lower level of cholesterol reaching the endoplasmic reticulum because of issues with this phosphatidylserine and PSS1, then the signal for a reduction in cholesterol production is not going to be sent. And so, of course, then it's going to continue to fight against all these other things that I'm doing. And this is going to be causing havoc on other markers as well, right? You imagine imagine your body's nicely like producing, one of these enzymes, and you're flooding your system with compounds to reduce it. But it's like, no, we can't reduce this, because otherwise you're going to have mitochondrial dysfunction. So then it has to upregulate these gene expressions drastically, like pulling resources from everywhere that it shouldn't, wasting resources to fight against something that you didn't need to alter. And so that, there's a really interesting mechanism here for reducing cholesterol production through PSS1 inhibition. And there is current research being done on PSS1 antagonists for LDL lowering therapies. So I'm like, okay, this is starting to make sense. Why would your body be producing too much cholesterol? Because it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's not getting to where it needs to. So your body is like, oh, I'm going to flood the system and try and get this to the end point. So I've been looking at production, whereas I should have been looking at. There's two things I think I should have been looking at. One is actual functionality. Is it doing what is it arriving to its destination and doing its job correctly? Yes or no? Maybe no, which is why I've started supplementing directly with phosphatidylserine to see how much, if that has an impact on the cholesterol delivery to the endoplasmic reticulum, therefore the signaling to reduce cholesterol production. So I've gone, rather than going for phosphatidylcholine, I've gone to the top for phosphatidylserine, because then I don't have to rely on things like SAMI or like other things that are part of that process for taking, like in the long run, this whole thing, maybe I just do with egg yolks and like arugula, or I don't know, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like mechanistically, it's like, okay, I just need to make sure that I'm getting phosphatidylserine as an end product. So if I supply all the raw ingredients, then I'm going to be getting that. And if I'm also flooding the body with things that are reducing these key or these important enzymes and signals for cholesterol production, what's the then knock-on effect on things like a depletion in phospholipids and things like that? Because they're having to then work even harder to try and produce more phosphatidylserine, to try and, it's an additional stress on the body that doesn't need to be there. So I was thinking about lowering cholesterol, whereas actually I think I should have either been thinking about cholesterol's endpoint, destination, goals, what's it trying to do, number one. And then the second thing is obviously just cholesterol excretion as well, right? Is my body producing the perfect amount of cholesterol? I'm just reabsorbing too much in the intestine, in the large intestine. Is it that simple? And so the other thing I want to test after, if it's that simple, man, how frustrating would that be? But charcoal had a moderate effect on it. So it suggests that, and charcoal could be hit and miss with my cholesterol too. Like some days I'll take charcoal at night and my cholesterol will be low in the mornings. Other times I take charcoal at night and my cholesterol will be very high still. So I don't think that it was, I don't think it's the most exciting thing for me for cholesterol lowering, or for, this, again, it's not necessarily about lowering, it's about just getting into a healthy, safe range. So the other thing for me to test is going to be calcium D-glucarate, because it just helps with cholesterol excretion. And there are studies in humans with like up to 30% reduction in LDL through calcium D-glucarate supplementation. I don't know if it's glucarate or glucarate probably.
Glucarate. What was the dose on that one for the human study?
Well, so it's low. It's like pretty low dose. It's like 500 milligrams a day, or so. It's like it's fairly standardized dosage. Yeah. And because that's a supplement I've bought and used previously in the past, because it's great. Because it can help lower estrogen, right? Because it works in the same way, potentially with cholesterol metabolism, or not metabolism, but excretion, supports phase 2 liver detoxification. So any of the excess stuff there isn't reabsorbed into the system. And so seemingly it has quite a profound effect on cholesterol too. So is it just that, rather than it being issues with cholesterol production, is it just cholesterol excretion that's the only problem? And have I wasted all this time and put my body through so much unnecessary stress to try and fight something that was never problematic? If it was just excretion, then you'd still expect to see a reduction in total cholesterol and LDL through inhibiting all the areas that I've inhibited already, because the net effect would be less still, right? So, but my net effect has been the same. So therefore, production must have increased, because if the net amount had decreased, then I would still continue to excrete probably roughly the same amount, and therefore it would remain, it would reduce in line. So I don't think it's completely on the excretion of cholesterol, but I think it could be playing a part in it, which is where I think in the long run, maybe a supplement for me that would be a combination of phosphatidylserine and calcium D-glucarate together could be like, that could be a 50% reduction in cholesterol for me, something like that.
Yeah, that's all you need, and that basically solves
So
your issue.
that would be job done. But I just thought, one of the TUDCA had a decent effect for me on cholesterol level. Nothing too exciting, nothing too crazy, but TUDCA supports cholesterol transport into cells, into the endoplasmic reticulum. Forskolin I supplemented with years ago, and that had a positive effect on my cholesterol. And that also upregulates enzymes for cholesterol transport. And forskolin has positive lipid modulating effects as well. So is the entire problem just a transport issue? Maybe. So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, a lot of things to test. So like this is great for everyone listening, but everyone should also be experimenting for themselves and test, because like everyone's root cause can be different, right? So I think we're doing great research, but everyone should be testing themselves though.
Yeah, exactly. Like if if someone's cholesterol levels are moderately high, but their diet isn't great, and and whatever else, and they don't exercise, then they probably don't need to worry about cholesterol moving from the blood into the smooth endoplasmic, into the endoplasmic reticulum. I'm sure that's probably happening just fine for them. But when you've dialed in everything else and there's still elevated cholesterol, like I went on as like almost a zero cholesterol diet for a period of time, and it didn't make any difference at all, none. So it's a production, it's a production or excretion issue, because you produce far more cholesterol than most people consume anyway.
That's true. For most people, it's usually just they need to clean up the diet, eat more nutrient-dense foods, and then fix their thyroid. And that will basically normalize the utilization of cholesterol.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if somebody comes to me and their cholesterol levels are high and they've got like very low thyroid, then it's pretty obvious, isn't it? But for me, who has moderate to high thyroid function, you wouldn't expect to see such high levels. And I'm looking into more. I'm sort of investigating more of the crossover between SHBG and cholesterol too, because I think there is some crosstalk there in some of the pathways and mechanisms too. Normally, they're inversely correlated. So again, I'm not normal in the slightest. So normally, SHBG and cholesterol are inversely correlated. So normally, someone with high cholesterol will have low SHBG because they have metabolic disorder of some kind. I don't appear to have any kind of conventional metabolic disorder. My metabolic disorder is unique to me, I guess.
Yeah, I just remembered. It's not just lipids, right? You have so many different kinds of. You got saturated fat, you got monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fat, and then you have different chain lengths and all of this kind of stuff. So one of the tests that I did a while ago was a lipid panel, I think is what it's called, or like a fatty acid profile. So it looked at a lot of like the monounsaturated fats, like the different fatty acids in the blood. So it's like a finger prick test, and you send it back, and that was quite interesting because my palmitate was like really high, and then my stearic acid was actually low. So I had an excessive production of palmitate, and you have palmitates inversely correlated with SHBG. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So my palmitate's high, and then my SHBG is low. This could be explaining that as well. So like going into even those details can be really helpful.
Yes, send me a link to that test for sure, because I'll definitely do that one as well. Um, as you're saying, what I'm measuring here mainly is LDL, which isn't a measure of cholesterol, right? So this is another thing. That's not a direct measure of, LDL-C is obviously, carrying cholesterol, but it's also carrying other things too. It's carrying your fat soluble vitamins. So by increasing my vitamin E intake, does my LDL, I know theoretically that shows is a reduction, but it's carrying more than just cholesterol, obviously. The palmitate's really interesting because I looked into palmitate as a mechanism for lowering SHBG, because there's a correlation there between high palmitate and low SHBG, and that's through de novo lipogenesis, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's DNL, de novo lipogenesis, is where the liver produces these, particulate palmitate and things like that from carbohydrates, and that process lowers SHBG through the mechanisms that I was just talking about earlier, with the same, the same pathways and so on. And so I thought, hey, do I have low DNL, low palmitate production? So I got some methyl palmitate that I can test for. At some point I'll test methyl palmitate for SHBG if the amylase stuff side of things doesn't work, because if palmitate is high in people with low SHBG, then maybe I need to bring my palmitate levels up for higher SHBG. But it would make sense for me to test my palmitate levels first. If they're high, then it's not going to help me, right? And this is where testing is so important. I could just be flooding my system with more palmitate, but the methyl palmitate doesn't have the negative, so within these fatty acids, the methyl palmitate doesn't work in the same way as palmitate does itself. It isn't broken down. It isn't utilized in any particular way. It's much more of just a messenger signal.
Yeah.
So there's correlation between palmitate and high LDL, and palmitate and glucose and insulin resistance and all these sorts of things. But methyl palmitate doesn't work in the same way. So and I think in general it's very anti-inflammatory, and it's very, very good for blood sugar markers and things like that, versus like just eating like loads of palmitate.
Yeah, where did you buy the methyl palmitate?
So I bought the methyl palmitate from Idea Labs.
All right, is that the Difabrin one?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
All right, I still wanted to try that one. I've only tried the metolipin, but I want to try the Difabrin one for sure.
So the reason I got that one is because it's like 800. It's like 4-1 in favor of palmitate over the other. I can't remember the other two that it's got in there. It's palmitate and
the stearate and the meseritate, something like that.
The stearate I'm really interested in as well. I'm really interested in the methyl stearate. I've been doing, one of the things I've been doing a lot, which I'll talk about another time, is experiments on hair loss. So that's why I cut my hair recently, because I'm doing some experiments at the moment, and I'm going to just keep it short and see how quickly areas catch up. But like in my 20s and early 30s, I had quite a lot of hair loss, and I don't have high DHT. So like first things first, I'd go to the doctor and they'd prescribe me things to lower my DHT, even though my DHT is not elevated, right? Fundamental problem with doctors and hair loss. But the interesting thing is, I won't get into it too much, but there's some really interesting stuff on the methylated fatty acids for hair growth. Some really interesting things on that. So,
was that topical or oral?
Topical.
All right. What specific fatty acids?
So they tested a whole bunch: oleate, stearic, palmitate, and they wanted it to. They presented it in a way that oleate was the most effective, but it wasn't, because it's really interesting when it comes to there's still this kind of taboo around saturated fats and the positive nature of saturated fats in the body, and so often the results are kind of skewed or misinterpreted in a way in which to favor the like olive oils and and these things that we know are good for us, etc., and they were using topical herbs, And again, on all of this, it said that it was all 5-alpha reductase inhibiting, but they didn't measure DHT, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, because it's so ingrained in people that DHT causes hair loss, that if anything fixes hair loss, then it must lower DHT, right? There's no other argument for it. And they don't even bother measuring DHT anymore. They just say, yeah, it lowers DHT for sure, like it must do, because that's the only way. Even though most people suffer from hair loss don't have high DHT.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that finasteride does, it is as a compound is anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
So could it be that it's the anti-inflammatory nature of it that's helping with this, and it's not to say that DHT doesn't affect hair cycles, because it does, but in a healthy body, your body is perfectly capable of dealing with that scenario and situation by itself. It isn't a problem. But in this particular study, they looked at they looked at particular herbs and particular fatty acid combinations to see which ones would have the best effect on hair regrowth in mice. And the methylstearic had over the longest period had the best impact on hair regrowth out of the fatty acids. Oleate, the methyl oleate had a little spike in the first few days, but then it actually finished in a similar place to control. All of the herbs that lowered DHT in the study saw an initial improvement, but by the end of the study, it had all leveled out to match control. But methylstearate was finished the study and still had improvements on control.
That is cool, man. All right, so if we're going to keep on talking about cholesterol, I'm going to start dreaming about cholesterol and lipids and all of this kind of stuff.
Done on that.
So let's wrap this up. My upcoming experiments and I really hope I can do this time, is the freaking carrot salad experiment. Like, I just have some whack-ass aversion to carrots, so I just have to force myself to eat some carrots. And then the other one that I'm going to be testing is the IGF-LR3 injections to see if that actually increases IGF-1. So I'm probably going to inject before my workout and then test the next day. Theoretically, the half-life is like 36 hours, I think, something like that. So I should still have an elevation by the time I test. So we'll see. There's some debate because there's only in vitro studies, no human studies yet. So I want to be testing that.
And so with the IGF-1, something I'm really interested in. What's the thought process behind IGF-1? Why would you want to increase it? And what's the kind of benefits to that?
Well, it's primarily bodybuilding, right? So you have IGF-1, which binds to the IGF-1 or the IGF binding proteins, and they extend the half-life. It's kind of like SHBG, right? Your testosterone binds it and extends half-life. Otherwise, your body is just peeing it out and getting rid of it. So now they've modified the IGF so it's not very affinitive to the binding proteins. So some people would say, like, because it's no longer has affinity to the binding proteins, your body is just going to excrete it because of that effect, right? So that's kind of like the theory I want to test. But also IGF-1 upregulates your androgen receptors, up like as 5-alpha reductase. It helps with cellular repair. So this is one thing we can talk about in a future episode as well. A lot of these longevity guys, they want to lower their IGF-1, but they don't forget that it upregulates mitochondrial repair biogenesis. It doesn't just stimulate tumor growth. It's actually, you need to be anabolic, right? It creates the system resilience, whereas low IGF-1 creates a low system resilience. So you need optimal. I'm not saying you should be maxing out and go like 5,000 measurement of IGF-1. Like a healthy level is roughly like 180 to 220. That's kind of like a youthful level for IGF-1. Now, obviously, the sicker you are and the more mutated your cells are, the higher the risk there is for the IGF-1 to create like a pathological growth. That's kind of like the thinking around keeping IGF-1 low. So, okay, well, your first order of importance is to make sure your cells are healthy, and then you need the IGF-1 to make sure you're growing those healthy cells. So that's kind of like what I'm testing. Obviously, 2 weeks is not enough to see a muscle growth result, but I'm going to be testing my recovery, HRV, and kind of like those short-term gains that I'm going to be making during that time.
Great. And you'll be testing IGF-1 as well during that?
Yeah, so I'm going to be testing my growth hormone and IGF-1. I want to see if it's
Great.
actually suppressing my growth hormone. And well, I'm obviously testing comprehensively. I'm just testing my liver enzymes, lipids, thyroid,
Yeah.
all my
Oh, that's
hormones and
exciting.
those kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because IGF-1 and muscle growth, like, so as I was saying before with testosterone and muscle growth, there's not much correlation there when you look at just testosterone by itself. But IGF-1, there is a correlation there, I think, between muscle growth and IGF-1, isn't there?
Yeah.
In people in general. So
Yeah, so when people take growth hormone for muscle growth, it has to convert into IGF-1. Like growth hormone in itself is not really anabolic. You need it to convert, and that's why bodybuilders are also injecting insulin. Insulin is actually more anabolic than insulin-like growth factor. They're kind of like in the same family, not exactly the same.
yeah.
But insulin and IGF-1, highly anabolic.
Yeah, I think I've never tested GH or IGF-1, so I think that's something that would be an interesting test for myself as well. I'm always looking to try and improve body composition. I think the longer you train for, it's harder to kind of edge out those little gains in improvements. And I've spent a lot of time, obviously trying to optimize things like testosterone. But again, this is where there's much more at play than just a handful of compounds, and so an IGF-1 would be really interesting. IGF-1 also, you know, is very linked to insulin, clearly, and so from my perspective, around the SHBG side of things, IGF-1 has an impact on SHBG too, doesn't it?
Yeah, hopefully it's not going to tank mine even more. So I'll have a
No,
look at that.
no. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't think it kind of is as much impact as insulin itself, but I think there is some kind of crosstalk there between those things. So,
Yeah, so I'm also going to be checking my fasting glucose, fasting insulin, C-peptide, because like it has some insulin-like effects. So it might also be able to modulate like better glucose disposal and all of those kind of stuff. So I'll look at those as
yeah,
well.
that's really exciting. Looking forward to those results. Yeah, and the carrot salad. What's the ideas behind the carrot salad? Or the
Well, it's
carrots?
kind of to compare it to white button mushroom, right? So the like white button mushroom obviously contains polysaccharides that directly inhibit aromatase, and then it also acts as like it helps to bind to bile and excrete it. So it can like help to lower estrogen in multiple different ways. Carrot salad works more just as a binder. I don't know if any
Yeah,
direct estrogen modulating effect. So I just want to see because some people's like I hate mushrooms. I want to have carrots. So I want to see like how it
sure.
compares to the two. But man, I'm so averse to
Yeah,
carrots. It's awful.
it's funny. Like most people are averse to, like, there's a lot of people averse to mushrooms, right? And I have this with the white button mushrooms. I'm like, some people take some convincing to go down that route, and they're like, oh, can I just take the capsules? And I'm like, I don't. It's not going to have the same effect, I'm afraid, because
Yeah.
so much of the benefit isn't just from the compounds within them. It's actually from the digestion, excretion, and removal of toxins that you won't get from
Yeah.
capsulated forms, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be this. It's gonna, if you kind of dehydrated a carrot and crushed it up and just took out the powder and had that, not going to have the same effect on lowering toxin as eating carrots, right? It's not at all. So it's I think the carrot one's definitely a really interesting one for people that won't have mushrooms. I for a while did the carrot salad, and I actually really liked it. Just do it with a little lots of salt and some apple cider vinegar, and that stuff's good to go. It's nice.
All right. Yeah. Like I've been eating carrots and that's just been disgusting. So I'm probably gonna make the salad.
Yeah, like great up loads of it, and just put in loads of salt and apple cider vinegar, and then it's really nice. Because
Yeah.
I don't really like carrots that much. I don't care about them. Like, I don't love
Yeah.
them, but the carrot salad, I can eat that. That's good stuff.
All right. So if you guys want to learn more about the androsterone and the white button mushroom, I have articles on Substack. So I'll link that for you guys below. I will be making the carrot salad. Hopefully, I will be able to do the tests in about 2 weeks or so. I think that's kind of like my plan. So I'll keep you guys updated with that. What's your plans? What's your next experiment? Did you mention again? Just to recap.
So yeah, so I stopped the I've got blood work coming in for next week. So for our next podcast, I've got blood work from my ginger ale experiment. So I did my fermented herbs. I did have bitter melon in there, and bitter melon does lower amylase. So let's see if my SHBG was still high because I wasn't eating sorghum,
Yeah.
or like I had a little, like no more than anything else. Okay, so I had a normal amount. I would normally have maybe a little bit sorghum bread or sorghum waffles a couple of times a week, something like that. So I did the fermented ginger ale or fermented herbs, and I did a full spectrum testosterone test that day. I then also did, on the same day, half an hour later, after a minute exposure to some pheromones, I did a second testosterone test. So I'll get both of those results in. So we can see if there was a spike in testosterone from the pheromones, and also if the fermented herbs had any major impact on my testosterone. And I did a week of that. So I did like a big thing of fermented ginger ale every day for a week, and it wasn't exclusively herbs. There was also some other compounds in there, which I'll talk about more next time. For me, it was more about just making a drink that I can make to optimize testosterone. So rather than have to take supplements and things like that, I could just have a drink each day, right? So it does contain a little bit of like a couple of vitamins and things like that as well, essentially added to the drink.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see how that's affected things. Obviously, then we can see, did I get a spike in testosterone from pheromones? Yes or no? I have a feeling it's a no. I didn't feel any different afterwards. And I'd be also interested to know, because often the ones I've got include fragrance. And I think the fragrance might have a negative effect on testosterone. And also, as we mentioned before, testosterone isn't the main driver for sexual arousal and libido necessarily. And so if, for example, pheromones gave you a little spike in 5-alpha reductase, or movement from testosterone to DHT, for example, or if estrogen is what's going to be driving your libido or your sexual desire at that point, then maybe my testosterone will be low. I unfortunately only tested testosterone. In the future, I think I'd like to test maybe estrogen and DHT, but doing a lot of DHT tests gets pretty expensive. They're not cheap, those ones. So, but it'll be interesting to see how it affects testosterone, because that's what people think it's going to affect. If it's actually increased DHT or estrogen to increase desire, then testosterone will have reduced. If testosterone is reduced, then it's an interesting concept that there's something mechanistically happening. If testosterone is unchanged, then great, boring, fine. But if testosterone is changed, then that's interesting. Whether it's higher or lower, it's still interesting. Yeah. And then, so I've got those 2 sets of bloods coming in. And then the only other one I've got to do is I'm currently taking phosphatidylserine on pretty high doses for the next few days. I'll do the cholesterol on that. I'm not going to bother doing the full hormone side of thing. I mean, anything that's going to get cholesterol into cells is going to potentially help with testosterone production anyway, because you need cholesterol in your Leydig cells. So if my cholesterol uptake is improved drastically, then maybe I should do a testosterone test as well. I don't know. And I'll do the lipid panel or early next week, and then I'll start the amylase one after that.
What about the creatine experiment?
So the creatine one, I've got the other DHT test booked. I want to have a clear run at that one, in the sense of I want everything to be quite stable for it. So what I'd like to have is, I'd like to have a set of bloods where my SHBG is in a good place and my free testosterone's in a good place. Because if those things are like out of whack, then I don't think it's going to give us the best data on the creatine. But we can compare, probably most sensibly is we can compare throughout the DHT experiments, we can compare DHT to free testosterone as a marker for progress, I guess, is probably more sensible than as a independent, like total figure. Total figures vary a lot more than percentage changes, don't they? So
yeah. All right, that's fascinating. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, so the creatine one will be coming up in probably, I'll start that in about 6 or 7 days in that case, yeah.
All right, sweet. Well, there you guys have it. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.
See you later, guys. Cheers.